About a year ago, I decided that I wanted to learn more about photography. And at the time, I had the camera that I'm shooting this video on right now, the Sony a6300, and I realized that it had all these settings and features on it that I actually really didn't know how to use because I was always shooting in automatic. And combine that with the fact that, you just hold the shutter button down and take a million photos, and then later on picking, the best photo from the bunch. Like, doing this, I wasn't really learning anything about photography. So I thought the best idea would be to go back to the basics and learn how to shoot and film. To test if this was an idea that I could actually be serious about, I ordered a disposable camera like this off of Amazon. You could also easily buy these at your local drugstore like CVS, Walgreens, or Duane Reade. But I took this camera and I pretty much went out and shot a bunch of photos, and I found a local photo shop near my apartment where I dropped the camera off and got the photos back. There weren't that many great photos in the bunch, but getting the photos back and then figuring out where I'm gonna put these photos, it made me really start thinking about that experience of stumbling upon a box of old photos in your attic or your garage, and then really reminiscing upon old times. Nowadays, with digital cameras and photos being saved on SD cards and hard drives, I just feel like future generations are not going to be able to have this experience, which is actually quite gratifying. So thinking about wanting to have that experience for myself at some point in the future, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, that's what really got me to want to commit to learning how to shoot film above just wanting to learn more about the art of photography. So to step up my film game, I did a little bit of light research online, and I found that if you just simply search for one of the popular camera manufacturers along with the terms film camera, you can start getting the lay of the land of what's out there. And you'll find that you could pretty much find a film camera for $50 or less. Since these cameras are typically really old, the things that you're really looking for in your first film camera are whether the camera's a rangefinder or an SLR, does it come with a built-in light meter, what's the highest shutter speed you could shoot at, and lastly, what's the lens that comes attached to it, what's the focal length, what kind of aperture range do you have on that camera. So I ended up finding a seller on Etsy who actually re-leathers old cameras, and I ended up buying this Yashica FXD camera. And this camera actually came out in 1980, but the main reason I bought this camera was because it had a built-in light meter. In this camera, when you're looking through the viewfinder, there's actually a little light inside that tells you if you have the right amount of light. So when that light blinks, you know that you're going to allow just the right amount of light and get a properly exposed photo. The next big reason why I decided to buy this camera is because it's an SLR. And what that means is when you look through the rangefinder, you're actually looking straight through the lens and seeing exactly what you're going to capture when you take your picture. And I'll tell you how that's a little bit different from a rangefinder style camera when I show you my next camera. So when it comes to film, I pretty much just looked on Amazon to see what was the cheapest 35mm film that I could find, and I ended up settling on this Kodak Ultramax 400 film. It's not the best film, of course, because it's cheap, but actually some film enthusiasts like to shoot on cheap film just to get that specific kind of look to their photos. But since then, I've kind of also upgraded my film game, and for color photos, I've now moved on to using Portra 400 film, just based off of the recommendations of what other people are using out there. And for black and white, I use Ilford HP5 Plus, which is also a very popular black and white film. I actually don't know that much about film, but I really like how the photos come out after using these films, and these are the two films that I currently use in my current setup. So if you're curious, here are just some of the photos that I've taken using this Yashica FXD camera. So after a few months of using my Yashica FXD camera, I started keeping my eye out on prices for Leica cameras. I primarily was looking at the M6, and prices for that were hovering around 1,600 bucks, which is a lot of money. Cheaper than that is the M3, which is going for around 1,000 bucks. But the main difference between the M6 and the M3 is that the M3 does not have a light meter in it, where the M6 does, which is why it's a lot cheaper. So I found somebody on Craigslist who was actually selling an M3 for only 600 bucks, and I decided to jump on it. So that's the camera that I'm currently using here. Since I was able to find the camera for so cheap, I decided to splurge a little bit on the lens. So the lens on this is a Voigtlander 50mm f1.1. That's this huge thing right here, and this lens actually goes for a little bit more than the camera itself, at about 750 bucks. So the main big difference between this camera and the Yashica, which I showed you before, is that this is a rangefinder style camera. Now, what does that mean? It means that when you look through the viewfinder, you're not actually looking right down the barrel of the lens. Instead, you're just looking through a piece of glass pretty much. It's not going through the lens, but it's pretty much just predicting what your photo may look like. It's not actually looking through the lens to see exactly what is going to be captured by your camera. So since there's no light meter in this camera, there are phone apps available that you can use to help you determine the amount of light that's in the environment. So the app that I use is called OKO Light Meter. And basically all you have to do is open up this app, set the ISO to the ISO of the film that you're using, and then you point the camera at what you want to take a picture of, and it'll tell you what settings you should be using on your camera to get the right exposure. So this camera is truly a fully manual camera. And ever since taking photos with this camera, I've learned so much about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO film, and also just being able to read my environment and the amount of light that's available, that when I do now use my Sony a6300, I do know what all of those features and settings mean, and I can fine-tune and tweak them to achieve different looks that I would not be able to do if I'm just shooting in auto mode. So that was just an overview of how I got into film through the various cameras that I've purchased. And since I bought this guy, maybe in a future film I'll try and do a disposable camera challenge.